Okay, so welcome back to Enter the Double Dragon podcast. This is episode 115, coming with you live via our houses. It's me, Shane Greenwood. And with me online, I have Trenton Lawrence.
Hello.
Ooh, and Hugh O'Donnell.
Hey.
Hey. Flash background, guys. Like them?
I like this.
Professional.
Yeah, very professional.
Yeah. Professional, but like with the stonks guy.
Stonk.
All right. So, like, there hasn't been much going on except for, like, Fight Island. That was supposedly meant to go ahead. And then abruptly got cancelled. Who saw that coming?
If you believe for 1 second that was ever going to happen, you're a fucking idiot.
Hey, don't talk about me that way.
It's, bizarre times. It's, I don't know. It is. It's totally strange-ass times at the moment from there. But... well, it wasn't. It was like, I guess it was never going to happen. But it's like the push, the absolute push from Dana White that he was given this. I'm just going. It's like, and you saw the memes kind of like, man, this is straight out Enter the Dragon kind of shit.
Yeah. I feel like the whole kind of premise of the Fight Island was like Dana knew the fight wasn't coming, but there was just that image thing where he could just kind of be like he never had to actually give up and call the fights off. Like, he just had to keep pushing until it was out of his control.
Oh yeah.
It was the governor of California called Disney. The head of Disney's Bob Iger, so you know he got that phone call to tell them to call it off, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
So it's not Dana's fault.
Yeah, but also it's like, why do you want to look like you were like relentlessly pressing forward with the most horrendously unethical event you could possibly do?
Publicity.
Like, who benefits from that that image?
Yeah. I would have liked to see this Fight Island.
Does it even exist?
No. Oh.
I don't think there was ever an island, to be completely honest.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't think it happened either.
Mm.
Well, that's done and done. But seeing that there's a lack of combat sports, it allows us to kind of open up some other topic, points of interest that people talk about. So one of them was, past era fighters, how some of them, how they'll go in today's modern day combat sports. So we've all picked a couple or one or two, go from there, and then we'll each kind of like, give our discussion, like how we thought they would have went from there. But like, I'll go first because as I was talking to the boys before, I did have notes written up, and seeming that we're kind of locked down, I'm stuck with two fucking kids. From there, my notes have disappeared. Abracadabra. They're gone. So, all right. I was like, hey, watch your notes turn into confetti.
Yeah. That's cool, though.
Yeah. So, but I'll try and remember the stuff I've written down from that one. So, I went into more of the boxing side of things from there. I chose a welterweight fighter, and it was Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker. If you don't know who Whitaker was, he fought such people as Azuma Nelson, Julio Chavez. Who else I was just watching before? Oscar De La Hoya from there. And, he had a really good run. Felix Trinidad was one of his later fights as well. And, he was really known as, a defensive master. Such. So, he had 40 wins, 4 losses, which I think one of them turned into a no contest after he tested positive for cocaine, and which he won. He won that fight, though. And he had 17 knockouts. So he wasn't known for, knockout power, but he did blast people in his kind of countering style. He was a southpaw. And he kind of, he had always a pretty loose, low guard in terms of, you got a high guard position, which is, hands in front of the face, or, Philly shell. He kind of used more of that low guard, whereas his hands were more at his chest level. He would sometimes go into a Philly shell with his lead arm in the L position. From there, where he could use the shoulder roll, which he did a lot. But you find a lot with his movement, with his style in particular, it was a lot of from the legs and waist bending. He did crazy shit, basically almost sometimes get himself to the rope and sit on the bottom rope while still ducking punches from there. And really, if you kind of watch how, he was this, especially one bout in particular that I just watched him recently again against Oscar De La Hoya, there was a couple exchanges there where he's just dodging like about 8 punches in a row, going from dipping to one side, rolling under, pulling back, bending away, putting his head close to their chest, and kind of pivoting out. So Pernell Whitaker, in terms of if you're looking for an action-packed fighter, he kind of wasn't that type. Did he have really good action-packed moments? Yeah, he had heaps. But if you kind of appreciate the subtle nuances of defense and how he applied them against high-level fighters, he's a great watch from there. So with his style also, he had a great jab selection. So these jab selections were for a southpaw, he fought mainly right-handed people. So we had this open guard exchange with the lead hand to each other is a little bit more blocked off, and you have to find ways to kind of go around the guard. But for a guy that a lot of old boxing heads would say you can't use the jab against a southpaw against right-handed. Well, really the jab was one of his primary weapons. A couple of ways that he'd use it was he would either you're trying to get outside the southpaw, he'll wait till you step outside of his lead foot, hit the jab, and then usually duck off, which is another defensive trait of himself. Was every time he threw a punch, he was very rarely in the center line get hit again. He usually ducked off a bit or he closed the distance. He also used his jab to step off to outside the lead foot there and just multiply it, so it kind of blocked your entry off to kind of get into those open guard exchanges. He was also really good at just kind of probing. So, stepping in with the jab, but never being fully committed. He always stepped in the jab, ready to pull back. So he'd step in, and he just knew you're going to counter back with something. So he'd pull his head back and just unleash lead left hand. Also, that straight left hand afterwards. So, why do I think his style would have transferred well into today's game? Well, it's kind of like saying why was Floyd Mayweather so good from there? It's defensively, he fucking hardly ever got touched, really bad. I think in his 4 fights, I think he's only been KO'd once. Okay, and and he very rarely ever got knocked down in fights. And that's because, same thing, it's just defensive game was just spot on. There was even times where you see him, he was a really good master of rolling with the punch. So when people going, the good boxers will aim for the point of your chin, he'd actually roll with the punch a bit from there. If you watch closely, it looks like he gets clipped, but actually he rolls with it and just barely it just kind of glances off and never really suffering any damage off of that.
Yeah, would you say that across eras, especially when you're looking at boxing, an ability to not get hit is probably the best definer for whether a style would carry over into later eras?
Yeah. Well, you look at a lot of the boxers nowadays that boxing into their 40s, Manny Pacquiao. He was actually a bit probably different, but he actually picked up his defensive class probably in the second half of his career. That's made him last this long. So it's Bernard Hopkins, Floyd Mayweather, all the boxers that really last at the top end and carry into the late 30s and early 40s from there. You usually find that the defense game is really spot on. So, a couple of ways we can just you can look at what he did was he was really evasive. I was watching him today. I was going, fuck, I actually really like watching him. I should sit down and watch a lot more of his fights. I've watched a bit in the past, but it's been a while since I watched them. But just going in between, the how he moves his head and just how effortlessly he can read people's punches. And it's more so because once he puts himself in one position, he just goes, well, there's only so much people are going to throw back from here, so I'll just do basically a blanketed approach defense where when I move this way, there's only so much you can hit me, and then same thing back here, changing those head slots side to side or putting your head into the chest. And usually when he goes inside there, he uses his lead hand because it's already down in that L position, underhooks the other person's arm or overhooks the other person's arm and just dirty box them up with the left hand off of that. He's athletic wise, yeah, he was great. He was a great athlete. Even to his later stages of his career, where it seemed like he had more drug problems than anything, where he tested positive for cocaine a couple times, and yeah, he is. You're making money. He's making a couple of million a fight by those stages.
Yeah.
In that one, a multi title decorated fighter as well, and Olympic gold medalist
The crime
Also?
would be not doing cocaine.
That's it. It's just disrespectful using all that money for positive things.
Pretty much.
Doing jiu-jitsu and not smoking marijuana. It's
Yeah, I guess
the same thing, right?
hand in
Disrespectful to the art.
hand. Hand in hand. So those kind of couple fights and those kind of couple tactics, like looking at today's era fighter, whereas like let's look at welterweight itself. So off the top of my head, yeah, Manny Pacquiao is there, but you also got this younger breed and this this big breed. They're huge like welterweights in there, like Terence Crawford, Errol Spencer's massive in that one, and you got people like Danny Garcia and that as well. So I think Pernell would have went really good because, especially in this, because it's an action-packed era. It's more about fighters are rewarded for more action these days, whereas back in the day, I think maybe defense-wise, maybe might have been scored a little bit better. Yeah. While today is more so, it's all about the action. It's about the offense, and it kind of plays into Pernell's style, whereas really he was defensive savant. He was a counter fighter, and really and kind of picked his moments of when to really up the tempo, because there'd be large bouts at the time he's just eating up the clock, circling off to his right, making people change. Like when they're coming close, would pivot off and just push them, or just mark up their hands. So if I look at someone like him versus Manny Pacquiao would be I reckon out of the top three would be the best bet for him. Same from this, it's Manny Pacquiao likes to put a lot of offense from there. He doesn't mind coming in a bit. He's very straight line as well, Manny Pacquiao.
Yeah.
It'd be pretty similar to, let's say, maybe a higher pace fight than he had with Julio Cesar Chavez. Where Chavez, just classic Mexican style, just come up, forward pressure, trying to gas out the legs of Whitaker, because he just knows he's going to dance around, and just belt him to the body. But cutting the ring wasn't a big, was hard. It's hard to cut Pernell Whitaker to cut him down. If anything, if you go look at the faults that he had was he would literally run himself into the ropes. He was good at turning off the ropes, but he would literally run into his ropes, and trip over his own feet at times, especially if he was really bum rushed. And same thing when he's kind of circling out. Same thing, he kind of just cross his feet a little bit, just that kind of crosswalk away, and sometimes just trip over his own feet once he just got really heavily pressured. So him versus Manny Pacquiao, I'd kind of lean towards Whitaker taking the points decision over Manny Pacquiao. Just more so, the same thing is just Manny Pacquiao has a zero inside game.
Yeah.
It's he just as soon as someone comes in close to Manny, he doesn't try and tie up too much or push off. It's really just he just puts the horns on and just kind of gets in there and tries to back off. While Whitaker it's does his best offense on the outside, but inside same thing. He was a dirty boxer. Julio Cesar Chavez again. He fucking cock punched Julio Cesar Chavez at least 4 times in that whole fight. Bad. Just goes yep, boom. Just he doesn't mind to get a little bit dirty, and to kind of play the long game in a 12-round fight. So that was my pick. Pernell Whitaker, Sweet Pea, passed away not too long ago either. Unfortunately, got hit by a car. Of all things.
How old was he?
55.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, wasn't too good there, but for him. But yeah, he's my pick, and I do suggest that people go out there and watch some of these fights, especially. You got all the time. You got no excuses now. You can watch some fights.
Across the board, whenever we're talking, obviously, because we're going to get into an MMA pick in a bit, and MMA, when we're looking back into other eras, you can't go back that far. Obviously, the sports, it's fairly new. Whereas in boxing, it's not only been around a really long time, but it's been documented for a really long time. So we have a lot of data on boxers from eras way, way, way back. And I know there is a lot of people like to, old boxing heads really like to glorify past eras and say that the eras. I think when we're looking at MMA, the general consensus is that each year it just gets better. When you're looking back to a past era, the fighters today are a lot better. Whereas in boxing, it's a little bit more argued. People will argue about which era was the best. When you look at when Pernell Whitaker fought, how do you compare the skill level of the guys then to the guys today?
It was like for his division, it was pretty good.
Yeah, it was a good era.
It was a good era. Like, it was pretty solid. Like I said, like a Zuma Nelson, Julio Chavez. That was more towards the end, but like he was 87-0 at that point until he met Pernell Whitaker and he fought him to a draw. But it's one of those ones like how many of those guys were really good then. Also,
yeah.
Even though he was a great boxer, but it's like I think there's a little bit of padding in that.
Great boxer with a padded as fuck record. Like you can have both.
Yeah, and it's like it's really hard because like this year like welterweights it's killer.
Yeah, welterweights.
It's absolutely killer like nowadays. Yeah, but I think welterweight's always been a strong division.
Yeah.
In boxing. Yeah, so like I think like not going that too far back, which is like you go into the 90s and early and 2000s, like it's been pretty consistent really.
Yeah.
In that one, it has a good lineage of fighters in it. So that's why I said like for that like comparable to now, it's like in terms of like skill level is like it's pretty comparable to each other. And if anything nowadays, I probably think there's just a lot more like probably better athletes in boxing nowadays because they just seem they just seem like probably a lot bigger now as well.
Yeah, they're a lot bigger now.
But the speed hasn't changed. Like Terence Crawford is insanely quick, and like Manny Pacquiao's insanely quick as well.
Yeah, Crawford's an absolute threat.
Yeah. But it's like like I was looking like hearing Barry Robertson was saying like there's a certain level where it's like you train speed, but like as soon as you hit elite, everyone's fast.
Yeah,
doesn't matter. It's like it's like how do you deal with speed? Because everyone's fast. Like it's like you shouldn't even have to like think about it. It's like you just gotta assume.
It's kind of just a prerequisite.
Yeah. But I think boxing nowadays to then is like it's the skill levels are still pretty similar.
Yeah.
All right. So and I think more so like with like as we go into MMA soon as well. Do you guys think that like since MMA started to where it's now, and same thing like and looking at boxing as a whole, has been a lot longer time, but you reckon they've basically adapted and evolved a lot quicker in the shorter space of time that it's been around compared to boxing and Muay Thai?
MMA, I think, has. I mean, it's only started in its modern form since '93, really, since UFC 1. And if you compare those early fights, most of it's cringeworthy if you compare it to modern fighting. So MMA's definitely gone up in leaps and bounds, which is, for me, it was a little bit tricky to pick a fighter, an old MMA fighter compared to a modern era one, because it's like you were saying, there's not that much data. But it's one of the reasons I went with George St. Pierre as my pick, because he started in UFC. His first fight was 2004, and he's still being talked about as though he's relevant, and he is. If you compare him to like fighters like Romero, he's like 41 and still active, and Damian Maia and guys like that who are still active. And George, he's not. I don't think he's quite 39 years old yet, and he's still being spoken about in terms of like super fights, and especially having a fight with Khabib and going down to lightweight. There's not as much data to compare with as there is with boxing, but you can see a huge progression in the short time.
MMA we've also watched become like the kind of like we watched MMA evolve from that structure of strict style versus style, like people with abilities in one area of the fight versus another. We've kind of watched it hybridize into what is its own style, like everyone's fairly well rounded now. But within that, even I think MMA's been massively trend responsive. Like we've watched in short spells, like. It's not a sport that has ever had a chance really to get set in its ways, where boxing's been kind of like the broad archetype of a boxer's necessary attributes has been pretty well set for the better part of a century. Mm-hmm. Whereas within MMA, we watched like the style versus style thing happen, and then obviously, like, it's been around in its modern form since '93, but didn't have rules the way we have them now. What was it, like 2000?
Yeah.
They sort of put it together the way it is now. So then, from there, we kind of watched it. Like, it's not, like we said, like, it's not a long time in its current form to watch it. But then it also feels like we've talked about before, within MMA, the kind of coaching sphere, it seems to be a lot more about attempting to be the inventor of something new. So we just watched like everyone latch on to training trends like really strongly for short periods of time and seen like the representation of it within the sport, and then kind of move, ebb and flow off of different things like that. So like we've seen it, like we kind of had to like watch it hybridize and then kind of like it's still kind of a sport that even possibly still today as far as how to train for, there's more options I would say as well, is how you put together an MMA training camp. Like it's not as much there's a right answer, but also like we've watched how the sport, like we've watched like massively different methodologies just play out in actual competition. It's like everyone's kind of like trying to figure it out on the fly in a lot of ways.
It's like you can even think about it like how MMA first started, like style versus style. While if you go back with boxing and Muay Thai, like back when it was black and white, like there's still stuff that you can pick from there today, where you just like you go, that legitimately still work. Like footwork or an angle save, like or MMA. While you look at like UFC 1, from there, like a lot of people, the bars probably set so like people go, it's like no, that's not going to work out today at the high levels.
Jiu-jitsu still works.
We've been watching them figure out how to do the sport rather than watching a fixed sport evolve, essentially. Because it's like most of the major changes around MMA have been like a massive change in rules, like the addition of gloves, stuff like that. So it's not like you can just look back in time and still pull things from people's skill sets because they've been made void by just developments in legitimizing the sport. Like it comes down to basically we've watched MMA fighters and trainers and officials just sort of, we've just been it's been popular while they still had no idea what they were doing. So we've just kind of been watching it become a legitimate sport in front of our eyes. So like the value of looking back beyond about 10 years is just like it's too different to try to pull anything into this era.
Yeah, definitely. All right, cool. So speaking about MMA, and like as Trent was talking about before, so Trent, your pick was Georges St-Pierre.
Georges St-Pierre, yeah. I picked him because his career with UFC or level started in 2004. So, it's like with MMA, I guess we've got to treat it like dog years in terms of development. Because that modern rule set didn't really start until after 2000 when Zuffa bought it and Dana White and the Fertitta brothers took it over and they made it a legitimate sport. They took out that human cockfighting element from it by putting gloves on everybody. But with Georges St-Pierre though, I think his style of having a really good stand-up game, relying on his jab, and having really good not just wrestling defense but wrestling takedowns as well. I think that translates really well into the modern era, which is why people still include him in conversations like, a super fight with Khabib or a super fight with Conor McGregor or someone like that. The only thing I would say he's got against him now is his age. But in his prime against someone like Khabib, I think you could pick him legitimately as the winner between those two. Now, I'm not so sure because Khabib's hitting his prime. And like I was saying, I think he's almost 39 years old now, GSP. So, but again, it depends on how he adapts. He might be able to adapt his game. He's got really good coaches. So he might be able to adapt his game to sort of counter some of the modern fighting styles to not take as much damage and to conserve energy and that sort of thing. And you look at guys like Romero, he's genetically gifted, but you could argue so is GSP. He's definitely a genetically gifted athlete. He's a definitely
in nature, absolutely.
Yeah, he's a real specimen. He's a legit athlete. And, he's had a diverse background in martial arts from karate, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, boxing. He's got good Muay Thai as well. He's trained with guys like Phil Nurse. Trained with him for a few years. But it's his fight IQ as well. He's got really high fight IQ. He can adapt his game. I think some of these more higher level opponents, he's lulled them into a false sense of security, like with John Fitch. They fought twice, didn't they? I think they fought twice. The second time, I think they fought twice. I know everyone expected him to wrestle with guys like Fitch and everything like that, but he didn't. He stood with him and blasted him with leg kicks and jabs and that sort of thing. But then you've got high-level wrestlers like Hendricks and Fitch, who he's gone toe-to-toe with, and he's taken them down. Like Matt Hughes as well. Yeah. He took him down the second time they fought. He took him down at will. So I think that skill set, where it's what we're talking about, being well-rounded, is the epitome of that. He's good in both areas. So if you shaved a few years off his age now, he'd probably still be holding titles. That's my view.
I think the thing with GSP, in a lot of ways, that makes his carryover value so good is that he was like, GSP was kind of like the first model of the modern MMA fighter. Like, he didn't have like so much like a really strict stylistic archetype. Like, he wasn't a wrestler or a kickboxer. He had like fairly well-rounded game, but also he was one of the first, I think, elite game planners, like under Greg Jackson. Like, he was one of the first examples of a guy who his fighting style would look broadly different dependent on who he was fighting. And he was really good at just working to the weakness of whoever he was fighting. But also one of the first, like, real MMA super athletes, like, really trained really scientifically, super innovative with strength and conditioning, where, like, I think GSP also one of the first really, really major MMA native box office draws, like, because he existed around the same time as Brock Lesnar, but Lesnar's drawing power didn't come from MMA, obviously. He was one of the first dudes to come up as an MMA fighter that was a really, really compelling pay-per-view draw. So obviously had the money to fuck around with different methods of training. But I think, like, GSP, I always thought, pulled MMA from that era, even like from that very last era of style versus style fighter engagements, to a like well-rounded super athlete. And that's more the picture of MMA that we have today. Like, really, like, he was one of these dudes that when you'd watch the countdown footage and things like that, he was training nothing like anyone else. Like, his strength and conditioning at the time appeared to be bizarre. Whereas now, like, the folk, like, there would probably, I would say, when GSP was hitting his prime, there was probably still guys that weren't doing strength and conditioning. Yeah. Whereas he just, like, it's a money thing as well, because he was very handsome and very popular. But he was pulling the best training from every area. Like, that's what the like, whenever you'd watch his pre-fight stuff, his training was so, especially under Faraz when he left. Well, he never really trained at Jackson City. He just had Jackson.
He was at Jackson's for a while, I think.
Did he? Oh, yeah. So, but I think there was a while where he split.
Yeah.
So, there's definitely a while where I think Jackson just did his game plans in his corner.
He definitely peaked when he went over to TriStar, and he trained under Danaher at Henzo Gracie's and that as well. They all cross-trained between those teams.
I think, like, what you get here is, like, you see it even on a much smaller scale now, is, like, he didn't just have, especially when he was moved to Faraz, didn't just have all of his training in one room. It was like he travelled, or in his case, it was generally bringing guys in to really specifically design his training camps. And that's a little bit more what the model of an MMA fighter's training situation is now. Like, rather than just having a guy who comes up with everything and a bunch of training partners to work it with, like, he pulled from the top end of, like, every different area.
Yeah, he did. I think, didn't he do some work with Freddie Roach? Was that him as well?
Yeah.
It's like
Freddie Roach just cornered him in the UFC.
Yeah, he gave him a jab. It's like, It's like, it's like, I think he did more than just a jab, but yeah, just like, just aesthetic-wise in terms of his striking, like, he used his jab, but he used it in many different ways to, like, really kind of like stymie his opponents.
Yeah. I think Danaher and Freddie Roach cornered him in the Bisping fight.
Yeah, definitely. Like, how many, like, that's just, same thing. It goes back to where, like, fighters that can cross over, like, these that can still hang in, like, in later, that could hang in later eras, is like in their age, is also how adaptable they are in terms of their, defense, and like, how much damage they can they can warn off. Because, like, how many people can do like what George did? Like, it's a champ of 170 for ages, then just goes away. He just like goes chase aliens for a little bit, and then, and then he comes back and just dethrones the middleweight champ by knockout. As well.
Oh no, that was really no good.
Oh yeah, it's like That's actually he planted him on his face though.
Yeah,
first.
He did. He did knock him out if he wanted. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it's really good.
Yeah. So, GSP as well was probably one of the first major fighters who had a style built on ring IQ. Like, there wasn't a lot of, you probably want to call it cage IQ, octagon IQ. There wasn't a lot of, like, GSP had a style that was designed, I think the more established combat sports, like Floyd Mayweather will come up, because Floyd Mayweather could be an excellent example for this topic as well. But GSP knew how to score points, like knew how to win on the judges' cards, which I think is massively prevalent in boxing, and probably even more so in Muay Thai. But in MMA, there wasn't a lot of concept of that. It was still that kind of, hey, no one knows how the fuck they score MMA, really, still. And also, like, it was still that kind of mentality of, like, not so much the present mentality, but it was a little bit more like that don't leave it to the judges style of fighting, where people weren't thinking about securing rounds and what do I have to do to stay up on the judges' scorecards and things like that. Whereas GSP, was probably one of the first major, major stars that was content to win on points. Like, I think that was one of the things that pissed people off about him, is like he was really happy to score the points. And like, what did they say? Like, at one point he won like 30 straight rounds or something. Like, because he just went to the points over and over again in fights because he wasn't taking unnecessary risks. He knew how to give the judges what they needed to see. He had that scoring system worked down to a science and knew how to give the judges what they wanted to see to win the round without taking an unnecessary risk. Whereas, like, there is still, and when GSP was coming up, it was a lot more prevalent as well. Like, a lot of chasing, people just chasing to make things happen because they didn't really know what to do to score points, or they didn't. I mean, like, not to say, like, obviously, broadly, everyone knows what scores points, like damage. But when it gets a little bit more fine, people would generally be constantly chasing these big dramatic exchanges, knockouts, knockdowns, submissions, whereas GSP was generally pretty content to just do his thing and know that he was up on points. So I think, like, that comes back to, like, why GSP would kind of be able to fare in even, like, future eras, because, like, his era was not that long ago, is because his style was built on ring IQ and analysis on a fight-by-fight basis. So things that change would not really, like, affect his game too much.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and you compare him to other fighters of his era, like BJ Penn and that, and Penn's not even in the conversation anymore, whereas GSP is.
Yeah, I think
Penn
fighting GSP was probably, like, that showed you two different mentalities that were, like, going different ways. Like, GSP, the super athlete, and Penn, the really good technician, but a guy who was, like, if you compared their training camps, like, Penn was doing his work, he was doing his sparring and stuff like that, but wasn't doing any regimented strength and conditioning or really on, like, a structured training setup. He was just kind of doing whatever, like a lot of guys were in those days. And you could see the difference just in athleticism when they fought.
Yeah, definitely. Penn didn't seem like a guy that was for plans of any sorts, really.
By yes men in Hawaii.
Yeah, of course.
I think plans about GSP dropping down to lightweight are done now, though, thanks to Corona. Any talk of him and Khabib having a fight at lightweight doesn't seem feasible anymore.
But they would keep saying that he could make lightweight really easily. But mate, look, he can probably make it. But if you're trying to tell me that he's a natural lightweight fighting at welterweight, like that, I do not believe.
Yeah. Especially when you get older. It's like it
Yeah.
just doesn't work out the way. Especially like he went up to the cut. Did he cut down, or did he have some problems getting like the 185?
Apparently, they were trying to put some weight on. I think what they said about GSP was he walked around like he would cut from about 185 to make 170, and they tried to just put the weight on to him so he wasn't fighting at walk around, like apply a bit of muscle. And apparently, he had some big stomach issues. That's what they said anyway. Trying to apply muscle during his training camp, and that by the time fight week came, he was just so ill that he ended up actually his in-ring. They said his in-ring weight was actually lighter at middleweight than it was when he had been fighting at welterweight.
Yeah,
He could cut down to lightweight, but it'd probably affect his performance.
Yeah, I don't believe for a second that it would just be like super easy. That's a big dude. Got a big pair of legs.
He's a lot bigger than Khabib.
yeah.
Like his reach and everything. It's another reason why in his prime he would have probably beaten Khabib because of his reach advantage as well.
Well, Khabib's a massive lightweight too, but I just can't. I've never seen them stand next to each other, but I don't believe that they're similar sizes. I think GSP's a lot bigger than Khabib.
I think so.
Definitely.
So that was my MMA pick, just because of I don't know, like you were saying here, he's like the benchmark for modern MMA. I think.
Yeah.
Not just for his fighting style, but his fight IQ and his training methodology and all that kind of stuff. If I was going to have a quick dip into jiu-jitsu, I'd say Marcelo Garcia, just because butterfly guard and having a game plan against larger opponents, it translates really well into the modern leg lock era. So it's not just about sweeping people to get to their backs. It's also about getting them off balance to get to the legs. Yeah. So he was heel hooking people back in the ADCC, back in his time. But now that benefits leg lockers really well. Yeah. So those entries he's got from butterfly to the back or butterfly to the legs, still very relevant today. And plus he's got that north-south choke specialty, which you don't see a lot. But he developed it to a point where it's now a subset of jiu-jitsu. So my jiu-jitsu pick would be Marcelo Garcia for reasons like that. He's only like 77 kilos he fought around, defeating much bigger guys because he's in that sort of welterweight kind of sort of middleweight sort of category. It's just a good demonstration of having a game plan that translates across divisions and time zones and eras.
Yeah, it's like when especially you talk about jiu-jitsu where they actually compete a lot, like in their own weight class in absolute. Like the smaller guys that wins are those kind of 77, 80 kilo guys, because they're just that nice blend of you still got some pretty good strength, but you're a lot quicker. And then if there's a skill discrepancy from there, the usually the faster dude will take it out.
Lachlan Giles getting bronze in the absolute division at last year's ADCC is a good example of that. Taking the legs, taking the back, and having a set game plan, and only really losing that division to Gordon Ryan. He was like the best no-gi grappler in the world at the moment. So.
All right, cool. All right, so let's go to Hugh's pick. You got is it a Savat pick or something like that, or
no, Kempo Karate?
Of course, yes, excellent. No, of course, it's Muay Thai, and it's some good rules, isn't it?
Yeah. So, talking Muay Thai fighters who would hang in. Well, like when we're talking about, I find Muay Thai to be quite an interesting sport to discuss. When we're talking about how the greats of past eras would fare modern day, because like we touched upon with boxing, I do believe there's like an air within Thai boxing of the old era was just much better than the era today. Like you will find a lot of kind of like real like authentic Muay Thai heads will not budge on the idea that kind of the golden era was like just leagues and leagues and leagues ahead of the fights that we have today. There's a few reasons for that, like just sport-wide stylistic changes influenced by gambling and things like that, which is fair. Like if you ask, whenever we get into like my top fighters ever, like they tend to be from that kind of golden era. But when you get sort of one of the issues, kind of trying to unpack like the greats of each era in Muay Thai. Like Muay Thai is an old sport. Like it's not had like worldwide popularity for a long time, but like it's been around ages and ages. Like possibly even long, like probably even longer than boxing. Like Muay Thai is old. In its various forms. But when you get past, like when you're traveling in the past, like beyond the 90s, like there's not a lot of video around. So like a lot of the documentation of Muay Thai from past eras relies on stories rather than actual footage. And there's not in the way that you get with boxing and obviously with MMA, because like we were already on Facebook by the time MMA came around, pretty much, is that you also don't have a lot of records. Like there are like, you know, Lumpini champions from kind of the 80s and beyond that like they're not, their careers aren't documented anywhere. They just exist in stories that are harder and harder to come by because the other issue is translation. So once we get into English, it's like it relies on like stories from older Thais. Some documents get made by people who can manage to learn to speak the language. There's not a lot, but so what I went for a fighter that I really feel, looking back on, could come and wreck shop in this era was Desulnoy Chor Tanusukan, the sky-piercing knee. Desulnoy is an interesting one. Like that's not in any way an obscure pick. Like a lot of people point to. Desulnoy is one of kind of a trio of fighters that are like from this era that are pointed to as being potentially the greatest of all time. A Lumpini Stadium champion. His record that's documented is 110 wins, 2 losses, and 2 draws. I have no idea if that's at all believable, but his record would have been good. That's pretty strong record.
Pretty solid.
But one of the most, we'll just get into a little breakdown of his style for those that are unaware, because there's actually not that much you'll find on Desulnoy getting around. One of the most prolific Muay Thai stylists of all time, like one of the most relentless knee fighters. There's videos from back in the day of him hitting pads, and it is just one of the most ridiculously punishing, like loudest knee styles that like not a lot. Like there's been a lot of amazing Muay Thai knee fighters in the years since Desulnoy, but it's really hard to find a pick of someone that just had that sheer just like relentlessness with their knees, both in the application of knees, but in the power and delivery. Like you really feel bad for his pad man when you watch him hit pads. Like it's disgusting. But Desulnoy was active only like the very end of his career came in 1985. So this is a ways back. Like most of the fights that people watch from the old days in Muay Thai, like at the earliest the mid 90s. So anything beyond that, it gets a little bit scratchy, and the history is a little bit broken because, like we said, it exists in stories rather than actual documents. But Desulnoy, in addition to being just like having an absolutely famed run at Lumpini Stadium, was one of the first fighters to really represent Thailand in an era where Thai boxers would go to other parts of Asia and other parts of the world to fight other stand-up fighters. So a lot of the video that does exist of Desulnoy was when he would get to fight internationally. Like he went to Japan a couple of times. I'm not sure exactly where else his videos of fights that I've seen him fight internationals were. But like there's just these videos like all of there's plenty of stories of the Thais that went and fought the kickboxers in other countries and just like kind of opened their eyes to this. I'm guessing he was fighting the modified Thai rules, like the clinch was allowed but no elbows, because you can just see he's just latching on with his lock, and these guys are like swinging body punches, and he's just unloading this absolutely relentless style of knees. Because in the 80s, kickboxers that was a whole zone of fighting that was not understood by stand-up fighting in other parts of the world. So like just that lack of positional understanding, like because when Desulnoy would grab a hold of these guys, they didn't understand what he was trying to do, and he would just like step back and just swing his hips through these ridiculously long knees. So Desulnoy was kind of, I suppose, I guess not really, not that I wouldn't say he pioneered a knee fighting style. I think was probably the first to come to, probably the earliest just absolutely relentless Muay Thai. Probably, I guess the wording would be better, is what we now know to be a Muay Thai fighter, like it has certain. Being a Muay Thai fighter is not just a fighter who likes to throw knees. It's a mentality as much as it's an actual set of tactics, like that hard-nosed, gritty, very tough, always forward, always aggressive, just trying to smother space. Getting hit is generally a part of the Muay Thai style, because when you want to just walk forward, you're accepting you're going to get hit a bit. Disunoi was like, he is just the most the quintessential example of that Muay Thai archetype, and one of the earliest examples we can actually watch video on. He just had this style of it was a kind of pressure that we haven't even really there are examples of it, but you could make the argument we've barely seen again. Like, he almost walked out into the center of the ring and ran after guys. Like, he had this ultra jerky, massively energy expensive style. Like, he's just running this real jerky up and down, bolting forward. And then what would happen from that, the way he would cover the space, would mean that it would be a scrap early generally if you watch some of his fights. But then it was just the way that it never let up, that pressure and that just dominance of the center ring meant the energy of his opponents would just come down and down and down, because two things: he would just never ever stop. He would never take a break, never try to reset. Because he didn't care about making these entries perfect. He didn't care if he got hit on the way in. Basically, he was just relentlessly coming forward. So guys would swing back and they would have success early, but if you're going to scrap with Disunoi in the first couple of rounds, his your inability to deter him is going to mean your energy is going to start to zap the rounds go on. So like I said, to make a pick of Disunoi here, I haven't actually seen him fight in full that many times. Just a handful. There's a few on YouTube, and even some have started to only come out in the last couple of years. But I think Disunoi has a few things about his style, from what we do know, that I think would fare well. Really, that I just don't think eras can kind of evolve beyond. Like I said, part of what makes Disunoi so successful, or would make him successful even in modern era, is just a relentlessness to that degree is just always going to have you fare well. You don't see these massive stylistic changes in an entire sport where someone who is just that content to just insanely run after you, and be not deterred by taking damage to come in, just completely content to just say yeah, I'm going to take one to get in here. That's going to fare, that will obviously that just charge forward archetype. It has its own set of weaknesses in every era, but it the value of that, I don't think an era can evolve beyond, because it's just I guess how you'd say this in less words is he's just insane. That's being insane. You can only get so many people with that kind of demeanor per era. What I also think makes a good case for Disunoi as someone who could succeed modern day is a lot of his Muay Thai tactics, the way he frames his body, he really makes that kind of C shape in his torso to bear over his opponents. I find a lot of similarities in Disunoi's style and Pechpunchu, who is, he's the best Muay Thai fighter of a more modern day. So I think the way that if you watch the way that Disunoi fights, it kind of holds up against the way that the specifically the Muay Thai styles developed to modern day. I think that paints a good picture of how well he'd fare. But also, the main point that I think holds true for Disunoi's ability to succeed today is Disunoi fought at 135 pounds in his prime. He was about 6'3". Yeah. So 6'3", or I've heard 6'4", but that I don't even want to believe that.
Yeah, he's huge. Before today's podcast, I watched a bit of him versus Samarat.
Yeah,
he's fucking massive.
He's huge. Yeah. The thing with that's an interesting one because like the other fighter I was going to study for fighters that would succeed across era is of course Samart Kroon because he's like a lot of people's consensus greatest of all time. Was a really high level boxer as well. But like I said, Dieselno's peak was at 135 pounds, so 61 kilos, 6'3". Just ridiculous, and also just the perfect knee fighting build. So my point on that was, like, that's valuable today. That's a freak of nature. So, like, if you want to be a knee fighter who's that tall and that long for that weight class, like, that's just impossible. Because who's ready to deal with even today? Like, I can't think of anyone I've seen with that kind of frame for that weight in any combat sport, really.
Like that one. Closest he's gonna get is like George Mann. Like
George Mann's up there. But like Samart's almost as tall as George Mann.
It's ridiculous weight for that length. You know?
Crazy.
Would he consciously get down to that weight?
He was very skinny. Like he had a very like an almost freakish knee fighting build. Like just pointy in all of his limbs and just so thin through the torso. Would have cut a lot too. But you mentioned his fight with Samart Kroon. Really interesting fight to watch. I think that only actually made it to the internet in January or December. Through Sylvie Von Douglas had it. Somehow found a contact who had it on DVD. But Samart Kroon, his peak was 126 pounds. Or not even his peak, actually. The end of his career was 126 pounds. But had a Lumpini title at 115. So when you compare like the Dieselnoy was a career 135er. Well, it had fought lighter in his career too, but I believe his title run was 135. So they just made this crazy super fight between, because these guys were like the superstars of all superstars in that era. And it's just like the way things are over there. They wanted to see these two dudes fight, like how would the styles match up? So it's just this crazy blend of like Samart put on some weight and Dieselnoy made a freakish weight cut. Like in retelling, like the consensus is Dieselnoy almost killed himself to make weight for that fight. Like just this, because they weren't supposed to fight. It was like if we said tomorrow, like, oh, I want to watch Henry Cejudo fight. How heavy we would go. I want to see Henry Cejudo fight at the very least Khabib, but you could even go one more, or you could probably go, I want to see Henry Cejudo fight Kamaru Usman or something like that, and then trying to come up with some kind of way for them to meet in the middle on weight. Like it was, I don't think today you would see anyone come up with that because it's just like they were too far away in weight for that to be a compelling super fight. But they still did it. So like there was a huge side bet. I think like even back then the purses for those guys was 400,000 baht. I'm just going to convert that. Yeah, 20 grand our money, which is like, that's a lot. It's even more in those days, obviously, but like even today, that would be massive purse for a fight, so which is obviously would influence them to do it. But
when was that fight new?
That was the 80s at some stage. I'm not positive.
It was black and white. The one I watched.
I was kind of surprised by the quality of that fight when it eventually made it out. Like it was pretty watchable.
No, it's still fun. Yeah.
There's actually a really cool video. Like Dieselnoy himself commentated that, and they subtitled it, which is interesting to watch. Just his thoughts on that. But yeah, so Dieselnoy as someone who has, I believe, stylistically would still be valuable today. I think he had a lot of what we know about him is kind of how he's reproduced his style in training fighters. He's a massively sought after trainer. He splits his time between a few of the bigger gyms in Thailand. Like he lives in Pattaya, I'm fairly sure, but he spends a lot of time in Bangkok because people kind of bring him in when you've got a guy who has a big fight coming up and really needs a hard push. They bring Diesel in because he's one of the most ridiculously relentless trainers of all time. And I think you see a few things when you see Dieselnoy train people is you see he's an expert knee fighting trainer. Like he has so much amazing little detail about playing an aggressive knee game. Really good at teaching people to fight tall as well. So if you had a guy who had that really lanky build, obviously Dieselnoy knows all the tricks to fight long. And that was a big part of his style as well. It's like you kind of had that thing against Desonoid where you're like, if you're sitting at a long distance, because obviously he's a knee fighter, so you kind of at first want to be long. He was really good at disrupting the base. He came at the legs a lot with these little like thudding kicks just above the knees to kind of disrupt your base so you couldn't get anything started. And then if you try to go, I'm sick of being on the end of this really long kick and press in, then you were exactly where he wants you anyway, and he's bearing his weight over you, just like an exhausting style. But yeah, like really knows how to teach people to knee fight, teach people to fight long, but more than anything, he just impresses this style of just relentlessness. Like he absolutely pushes guys to the brink of death. And I think that is really categorizes a truly Muay Thai style. Like if you want to be a Muay Thai, you have to be fit. Like you have to be the fittest person in the room to be a Muay Thai, because it's a massively exhausting style, and you can't be a Muay Thai if you get tired first. The style just doesn't work. Pressing a knee is the most exhausting style of fighting. You have to be able to just like weather a storm. Like you have to. The Muay Thai style works best if you're trying to zap the energy of your opponent. So it's really fascinating to watch Desonoid train people. I got really lucky. I've met Desonoid. And train with him a little bit, but he generally trains with people that are of a little bit bigger deal than I am. But I got a little bit of info from him when I got to train with him. But yeah, he is just a fascinating trainer. But I think you can see the way that he trains people. If you use that to kind of paint a picture of how he was trained himself, it's not how your standard run-of-the-mill fighter is. Oh, I mean, not run-of-the-mill, but it's not the standard method of training a fighter. So I do believe that Desonoid was trained today, he would still be bringing something new to the table. Because if you watch him fight, it's not something that looks especially outdated, but it's not something that looks quite like when you watch Sanchai fight. It's it doesn't look like anyone else. Sanchai is like really different. Desonoid's the same. He really did have, while it was so characteristically a Muay Thai style, there was a lot of things about it, about his pace, about the way that he put it on guys, that was just so different to anyone else. So I think the reason I would point to Desonoid as someone who, if you just brought young Desonoid into the major stadiums today, he would still succeed, is because we've never really seen anyone do it the same way he did it. Like I don't think there was ever another Desonoid. So yeah, like really interesting career to study. Like one of the reasons Desonoid is so famous as like a famed potential great is because he finished his career on a 5-year unbeaten run as Lumpini champion, where they just ran out of opponents for him, so they forced him to retire.
It's like, you've had enough, buddy. Time to put that belt down.
He's probably the only documented example of someone who just ran through, because like Muay Thai is so much more than any other combat sport, characterized by guys, even the best guys win and lose, because like the activity rate, like guys fight so much in a year, and they constantly fight at an elite level. So like it's generally more understood that guys win and lose, even while they're at the elite level. Desonoid is probably the only documented example of a guy who just tore through a weight class to the point where there was no one left, which is pretty insane in the major stadiums. And yeah, really, like you could definitely make the argument that he's the godfather of modern Muay Thai. And that's why I think Desonoid would still go well today.
Yeah, nice. Excellent. It's good 3 picks there we got there, guys. It's like, probably if I took today from that one, main drill points is like stuff that kind of stood the test of time, to say for fighters all years, is like, lots of things. There's like, defense, like being able to limit how much punishment you take, having a mindset of like, being able to, adapt your skills and like source out better training is needed, and also just like unique of your own structure and utilizing it to the best of your advantage, and like and mindset.
Yeah.
Also,
yeah, I think that's like an important one as well. Is like there are intangible elements of what makes a style kind of carry through. Like someone like Desonoid, he was just crazy to a point where like it's, you can replicate techniques, but you just can't teach yourself to be a lunatic. Or in probably in GSP's case, you can't just teach yourself to be as naturally as intelligent as GSP is and things like that. So it's like sometimes maybe the intangibles of what could carry your skills forward into another generation, because you can't teach it.
Definitely. Awesome. All right, so we'll wrap it up there. It's coming out to the hour. My computer's filling up full of memory as well. I gotta get rid of some stuff. Yeah. But yeah. So hopefully everyone got a bit out of that, and like I said, like these 3 fighters from there, all 4, if you include Marcelo Garcia as well. Like, look them up. There's plenty of footage on them, except for with Diesel. There's a couple. There is the stuff that there is there. Like just even just like I said, just look at the training methods that he's doing. Some for some of the fighters he's doing today is also pretty good. So remember always subscribe to our new YouTube channel.
Yes.
Yeah, and to the Double Dragon podcast.
You need it in trying times.
Of course, that's it. You need us. You need us. So, also, you can always listen to us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, all podcast platforms. Okay. So remember, during this time from here, we are always looking for topics to hit. So hit us up, whatever, on our Instagram, Facebook, at End of the Double Dragon, or you can hit us up individually on Facebook and that. Okay, just slide into my DMs. Okay,
and stay the fuck home.
Yeah, that's right.
Stay home.
Stay safe. All right, guys. See you later.
Yeah.
Yeah.